And welcome back to part 2 of this show we have today with Joseph Farrell called Ancient War in Heaven. And now we're going to the war part that many will find very interesting. But first, let me share an observation. I mentioned in part 1 that we've had Hoagie on.
Oh, yes.
When I had Hoagland on, damn, I never had so many harsh comments under the video. So, man, he's controversial. So many trolls and criticisms, and it seems
I bet.
many people dislike him for his personality, I think, more than his information, because although he loves to speculate, he has a lot of good information, and he's been, first out with many things. But I understand Hoagland because he's so enthusiastic about it. He's so passionate.
Yeah, I know. He gets so enthusiastic and carried away. But he knows more about all of this stuff than probably anybody alive. He's probably forgotten more science than most people have learned. So
that's a great quote.
Well, I got that quotation from him, as a matter of fact.
But I think he deserves a little kudos because people forget his contributions to the field.
Oh,
the personality is clouding over. He was very early on.
Oh, yes, his contribution to this whole field has been immense. I first listened to Hoagland way back in the 1980s when the king of American overnight talk radio was Larry King.
Right.
Many people forget he got his start in radio and moved to television. And after King disappeared, it was Art Bell. But the original overnight Art Bell back in the 80s was Larry King. And Hoagland, I first heard Hoagland talking about the first edition of the Monuments of Mars, listening to Larry King.
Wow.
Yeah, so he put together the Mars mission and got Lambert Dolphin, and
he was actually one of the people who got the plaque thing.
Yes, yeah, he got he got Pozos and Carlotto and all of those people involved with the Sidonia thing. That was Hoagland.
And what I don't like in the flaming of Hoagland is that they often turn to, obviously ad hominem, but they often lie to take him down. And that I don't criticize him for, you can't stand his personality, whatever. Fair enough, that's a subjective evaluation. But when they claim that, oh no, he had nothing to do with Concrete, nothing to do with NASA.
No.
I know it's, but we actually, in the video, we documented that it's true. We put in documentation in the video just to shut those people up because that's so unfair.
It is completely unfair. The other criticism that people make of him, he did that map of Sidonia with Errol Torren, and one of the criticisms has been, well, he hasn't gone back and corrected the map with the latest photos and blah, blah, blah. And he should do that, otherwise he's just not credible. And I know exactly why Hoagland hasn't done that. It's because he's too busy.
Right.
He's moved on, and he's the type of person that's got so much on his plate and wants to do so much that he doesn't have time to go back and correct every little last detail or this mistake or update that. I know exactly what he's doing because I have the same problem. I would love to go back and take all the bugs out of Reich of the Black Sun that got into that because of a computer virus.
Oh, wow.
And I would love to do that. I just don't have the time. To go back and revise a book is almost as much, if not more work than doing the first edition.
That's
and
true.
I've got too many other things I need to do, and there's only one of me. I don't have a staff.
Really? Because there was this speculation that your predecessor in Prophilic, what's his name again? Isaac Asimov, that he had lots of children in his basement. Who did? You're up for suspicion, right?
of having a ghost writing team,
like slaves in your basement or something.
Yes. Well, I can assure everybody I don't. What you see is what you get.
Right.
I don't have a staff. I don't have anybody helping with this stuff. And,
no, it's sacrifice. It's sacrifice.
you know,
like Dolan said, if he said that if he didn't have a family and all these things, he could probably try to get to your ankles. You know, because everybody knows that you produce a lot of books very fast, and that comes with a cost. You're not the guy to travel, cruise around the world like actually Hoagland does. And you're chained to your typewriter all the time, it seems.
Yeah, I literally am. I jest with people on my vid chats that, you know, this is my social life, and that's quite true. It is. I've always been a homebody, but doing this stuff, it's constant, and you know, I'm always reading something, and reading takes time. And particularly if you've ever seen my library, I annotate my books very heavily. I have a system of doing it that once you know the system, that's what allows me to produce a book so quickly once I get the reading done, because it's simply a matter of pulling the book off the shelf and turning, you know, looking at my notes, turning to the right page. But I can write a book very quickly once I start the physical process, but it's the behind the scenes stuff.
It's the preparation that's consuming.
It's the preparation that takes so much time.
Yeah, I know.
But no, I don't have any secret teams. I don't have I don't have a secretary. I don't have anything remotely approaching. I wish I did.
Well, you have the Giza community. They have a role in this.
Well, yeah, the community is interesting because they write my blogs.
Right.
Quite literally, because they're the ones sending me the articles, which to me is interesting because I get to see what people are looking at. And my big chore during the week is going through all the articles they've sent me and trying to recognize any trends, and then blogging about those trends are the ones that I think are the most important that week. So that takes time. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that Hoagland and you leave space for details to be elaborated on and explored by others in your coming behind you, you know. So in many ways, that's what you've done too, because what Hoagland, the first steps he took, you really taken some of those steps and
yes,
he zoomed in on them. So that's how it has to be.
Yeah, he was very influential. When I first met him, I told him that, you know, I had been following him since his appearance on Larry King. And he said, oh boy, that goes way back. And I said,
how did you guys get into, how did he discover you in the first place? Did you send your books to him or something?
I don't honestly know. I wrote him a letter in 1988 talking about two orthorotated tetrahedra and the phase space being a hexagon. And I think he forgot about that, but he also got onto that idea of hexagons on the axis of rotation with Saturn and the clouds and all that. So I was in contact with him, but he never responded to that letter. And then I don't know.
Suddenly he started to talk about you and your books.
You know, to be honest, I don't know how that happened.
I'll ask him next time we have him on.
But he did invite me down to his home. I think it was 2008 or something. And that's where when we first actually physically met.
Oh, okay.
I think we had a couple of email exchanges prior to that and a couple of telephone conversations prior to that. But I honestly don't know how that happened. I don't recall. It's been such a whirlwind because, you know, first Hoagland and then Catherine Fitz and all of that. I honestly don't know how any of that transpired. I'm continually kind of stupefied when I think of all the people that I've gotten to know in the last 5 years that I never would have dreamed in my wildest imaginations would be reading my books. You know, because to me they are high octane speculation by a hack from South Dakota.
Even Tom DeLonge, I guess we could disclose.
Yeah, even Tom DeLonge, you know. Jeez,
who knows? Maybe Podesta too.
Maybe Podesta.
They're keeping an eye on you.
Well, oh boy, don't get me started on that. Yeah,
No,
I know
no,
they
no,
are.
no.
I know they are.
Yeah.
I told DeLong, check with your people whether they want you associating with me.
Hmm.
Oh, that's right.
But we will not go there now. But I'll just insert this that I recommend everyone to do and go check those blogs and the community because it's so vibrant. And the few visits I've afforded to pay. By the way, Giza people, if you're listening, I'm not alone in Forum Borealis, and one of my team members is the guy who Blue Green, my man Blue Green. He's the one actually being active on the Forum Borealis, by the way, on your site. It's
Right.
never me. Yeah, I'm there occasionally, but mostly lurking.
I see.
So he tipped me off, and he tells me that he gets people contact him and think it's me. And so what he's saying in Giza Destas, please don't describe that to me, whatever he's saying there. But when I'm there, it's so exciting. I don't get out until it's over. And especially you have these regular talks only for members, where you have the pre-chats, which are kind of informal and fun, and where people have their inputs. Then you have the main lecture. It's just like a university.
Right.
And then you have the after winding down, where people often, because I'm always so late there,
well,
and they're still talking.
Yeah, it's a lot of websites do vid chats, but you may get half an hour, an hour. Ours can easily go on for 6 or 7 hours. I always show up about 2 hours early, and we just kind of sit around and talk about whatever it is we're talking about. And then
yeah, and I know much good stuff is actually being talked early.
yeah, it's just the formal chat is when people send me questions or comments in emails, which takes up most of it. And you're right, it's a very diverse group of people. They're all sharp as tack.
So brilliant, educated, informed, intelligent. It's amazing. You've attracted the best.
Well, they're also willing to kind of speculate, and it's an interesting demographic. I think politically it spans the whole spectrum, left to right. I think demographic.
Yeah, but speculate, you say, but half of the alternative field is wild speculations. But the thing is, this is grounded speculation.
Yeah, this is our good stuff. These are very serious people. They read on their own. They're interested in different subjects. They bring their personal preferences and likes and dislikes about subjects and experience. It's a
there's room for divergent views too. I've noticed.
Enormous. I'm kind of always shocked. We've got old people, we've got young people, we've got people all over the world in these vid chats. One guy in St. Petersburg, another in Tartu, Budapest. We've got a couple in Germany. We've got somebody in France, Belgium.
Don't you have people from China even?
Oh, we've got, China, Macau, and Shanghai, Australia, Indonesia. It's all over. So it's an international, Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya.
A big advantage to what comes out of that brew, because there's so many ingredients that you have to, the elixir will come out of it,
Yeah, it's a really diverse group of people.
You know what? From now on, I'll refer to it as the Philosopher's Stone.
Well, we discuss a lot of philosophy. We did Kant last time. Somebody was asking about Kant, and I'm waiting for
Hey, our philosophy show with you, I thought that would be, because what we do here is that we have some populist shows just to get up the ratings.
Right.
And then we have the shows I'm really passionate about. Not that I'm faking anything. I mean, I like all of this stuff. But I also have those things that I couldn't afford to have on if it was just those things. And I sincerely thought our talk about we call it the hidden pattern of creation, but it's what we talked about then. But that's sailing up there as one of the more popular shows.
Oh, good.
And I think it's largely because you have an appeal far beyond the mere alien or antediluvian or materialist. You have a very philosophical minded audience too.
Yeah, this audience is surprisingly philosophical. I'm always amazed by what your show does, what the website members do. It's a very, very, it's both broad, but it's grounded. You know,
Yeah.
it's not shallow. And I'm always, I always enter the vid chats with a little bit of trepidation because the people's questions are more often than not above my ability to answer. But
No, but as a good scholar, you admit if you don't have an answer, and you're not afraid to speculate either. So, I mean, we're all suspicious. Thinking people are suspicious to the people who pretend that they have the answer to everything, and you can't even question it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's typical for some people in the field, but I'll not mention any names.
Well,
not you at least. Yeah.
Sad but true. That is true of this field. But there are some solid, genuine researchers out there. Ufology would be a complete shambles if it wasn't for Richard Dolan, for example.
Oh, so right.
I mean, stop and think about it. Ufology would be an absolute diva. Well, it would. It'd be like an opera, the same characters singing the same roles at every damn conference. It'd be an absolute clusterfuck if it wasn't for him. And I'm not mentioning any names either, but I could mention, you can think of a few old names that have been around forever and a day.
And some new that doesn't contribute either.
Well, and some new, yes. I'm not into blue chickens other than for, food. But
yeah. I don't know if that's even qualified to be called ufology. Maybe mythology, something like modern mythology.
It's nuts. Well, I think Dark Journalist has that one nailed. It's a marketing plan.
Yep.
That somebody in the intelligence community came up with. I think he's absolutely nailed that right on the head.
And if they didn't come up with it, they certainly took advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The let it happen hypothesis.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a plan because those two secret space program conferences really set them on their ear. But yeah, I think those two space program conferences set them back because they were serious. There were a different group of people than the usual divas, and they were all talking about some serious things. And then we get the marketing scheme.
Now the SSP has become a joke to many.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that was intentional. I think that was their response. They wanted to kill a change in the conference culture in this country, and the conference culture in this country is just really bad.
Yeah,
it's just.
But there's forces trying to fix that. I want to say that a thing you, Dolan, Hoagland, Fitz, many others have in common is that you are interdisciplinary, that you entertain broad aspects and approaches. That's kind of a break with the old school divas.
Well, yeah, we're interdisciplinary, and that's always the hazard because when you're generalizing, you always open yourself up to the fallacy of the footnote. The old adage about Hegel being challenged by a student, Herr Professor, your theory doesn't square with this fact. And his response was, well, then so much the worse for the facts.
I haven't heard that one. That's great.
But, well, yeah, it's typical Hegel.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with being a generalist, because there's always going to be the specialist who can argue the nitty gritty and throw sand into the transmission. But that's been the problem with academics.
That's because they have their head buried in the sand.
Well, yeah, anybody can do that. But that's the problem. We're not able to. Academics has become so specialized in the last century that it used to be academics was precisely to teach you how to be able to think across disciplines. But now it's...
In many ways, I'd say that Cosmic War is an interdisciplinary book.
It is. Yeah, absolutely it is.
Unlike some books of yours that are specializing, this one is a ground take on it.
Yeah, some of my books are specialized, but they're specialized in a general sort of way. But yeah, Cosmic War is
Broad brush.
a very very broad book. Um, and it was meant to be that way because, like I say, I regard it as kind of the keystone in the arch of all the other books
Mm.
because it's connected in some way or fashion to all the other books.
Very well. So now to take that on.
I'm ready.
And I guess our starting point, Joseph, is, I mean, we can't avoid it, and that's Sitchin. I think we should start there, because when he came onto the, I'll give him the kudos that when he came onto the field, it was fresh.
Right.
But he launched Frankenstein monster that went completely out of control, and he didn't even agree with many of these wild interpretations and doomsday panic. I mean, people were afraid of the Nephilims coming back and taking over and Planet X and all that.
Hysteric lunatics, yeah.
Yep. As I see it, you're more sympathetic to Sitchin than to Sitchinites.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But still, there's a criticism here, and you are diverging. So could we have that as a starting point?
Sure. Well, the way I came to this cosmic war thing was actually via the Giza Death Star hypothesis, because Sitchin wrote a book called The Wars of Gods and Men, in which, in passing, he kind of haphazardly mentions that the pyramid functioned as a weapon, and then he just sort of leaves it there. He tosses that out, and he doesn't really pursue the idea. He's much more interested in the fact that wars were fought over these things and by means of them, which is what I thought was also very interesting. But he doesn't really elaborate that either idea. So what I did in the Giza Death Star books was I just wanted to look at the idea of a weapons hypothesis. Did it make any sense? Could you make a case for it? And then in the Cosmic War, I wanted to look at the idea, well, is it really true that these texts talk about using pyramids as weapons and fighting wars over their possession? And in both cases, I think you can make the case. And this is kind of where I departed or took off from Sitchin. The texts that I examine in the Cosmic War are, to a certain extent, they're the same texts that Sitchin does, but I add some others that I think are relevant to the case. I add some Hurrian texts. I look at some of the Egyptian texts.
Yeah, but let's just say that the Sumerian lore is his starting point for those who are not too aware. It's Sumer.
Right, exactly. Now, one of the things that is interesting about his idea that really is kind of the centerpiece of my book is this idea that the wars of the gods were fought over the possession of weapons of mass destruction. So in other words, the wars were fought not only to control these things, but also to, and by means of those things, but in the case of the text that you see me examining, they were fought in order to eliminate these things. So it's a very, very interesting thing. It's a very modern sounding thing if you get right down to it. It's almost, and of course for Sitchin, the thing that I found so frustrating about his work is that he's talking in terms of rockets and nuclear weapons. And I'm looking at it from the standpoint that whatever these things were that they were fighting with and fighting for, they were certainly much more powerful and much more destructive than nuclear bombs, which is kind of my point of departure from him. Now, one of the texts I examined in the Cosmic War that I was just dumbstruck when I read it, is the so-called Epic of Ninurta. This is a Sumerian text, and that's the title. And I included the whole thing in the Cosmic War because I wanted people to experience the same thing that I experienced when I read it. Because, you know, when you think of the word epic, you're thinking Homer, or something like that. You're thinking of something that would be, in other words, more or less entertaining to read. But you sit down and read the Epic of Ninurta, and it's anything but an epic. It reads more like the index to the Sears catalog. It's about a boring of a read.
If you're a bureaucrat, you probably get turned on.
If you're working for the Internal Revenue Service or something like that, you probably find this a pretty exciting read. But for the rest of humanity, no, it's got to be one of the dullest texts that you'd ever read. But I wanted to include the whole text precisely to get people to see that this isn't an epic, it's an inventory. And what it is an inventory of are the inventory of the weapons that were taken at the end of this cosmic war. And I've always drawn the analogy to World War I because you have almost the same thing being played out in this so-called epic. The first thing they do is inventory all of these so-called stones, these tablets of destinies. And they slate some of them for destruction. They cart off others for use in other applications. And then there's a very small category of these tablets of destinies that are so destructive and that cannot be destroyed, which is very interesting. They are hidden away.
But hang on, the Tablets of Destiny, that's a clue. Is this inventory the same as the Tablets of Destiny?
Yes, yeah, that's what's
called the Tablets of Destiny, right?
Yeah, that's what this inventory is. It's an inventory of all of these different May-Gal-Gal. That's what the Sumerian term is, which is usually translated Tablets of Destinies. So this is an inventory, and when I read it, I thought, geez, this sounds like the French and the British at the end of World War I, taking an inventory of everything in the German war machine, carting off some of it, and then turning around and destroying some others of it. And of course, the Germans doing what the Germans do, hiding some of it for use at a later date.
No, but let's go into this a little. You're not taking away the interpretation, the consequences of that, but let's make people a little more familiar with the protagonists and antagonists. You have names like Tiamat and Marduk, often.
Right.
Many people interpret them as planets. Then you have the very well-known gods like Enlil, Ninurta, and Enki. Right. And I think we should outline a little what the drama is about.
Well, the drama, quite frankly, is if you look at these texts and look at the text, not just the Sumerian text, but some of the others that are very suggestive, like the Hurrian text, the Edfu texts. What's always the case, it seems to me, is that these wars are being fought over who gets to possess these horrifically destructive technologies. It's almost as if you're looking at an ancient version of the issue of proliferation, okay?
Right.
And what they're fighting for is possession of these things, and at the same time, they're using these things to fight their war. And if you look at it from the standpoint of the Sumerian pantheon, for example, if you look at Lawrence Gardner's family tree, so to speak, of the Sumerian pantheon, what you discover is that one side of the family tree is fighting the other side of the family tree.
So who are the factions?
Yeah, this precisely is it. You're dealing with factions representing Ninurta, Nergal, Enki on one hand, your Enlil, Anu, and people like that on the other hand. And again, I can't help but think, and I've used this analogy over and over in my interviews and in conference presentations. In fact, at the Secret Space Program conference in Bastrop, Texas in 2015, my whole first presentation was drawing out the implications of the ancient texts and World War I. Because what was World War I? Well, it was a big family feud.
Yeah.
That's what it was. The Kaiser is Queen Victoria's grandson and cousin to Tsar Nicholas II, and related to the House of Habsburgs in Austria and the Savoys in Italy, and on we could go.
And by the extension, the World War II was, a part of World War One. It was just a revival of it.
Yeah, World War II was Act Two,
Yeah, Act Two, and I would say even the Cold War was Act Three.
Yeah, it's been a long sort of family struggle, but the interesting thing is you have this inventory being taken at the end of World War One of German technology, of the German war machine, and certain things are prohibited to the Germans. Don't use these things again. We've had enough of that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're reading the Epic of Ninurta updated a bit, because this is exactly what you see there. An inventory is being taken. Some things are being carted off and reused. Some things are being destroyed. And then there's that mysterious class of things that can't be destroyed. And they're hidden away.
Exactly. It sounds eerily like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same.
In fact, you even have a chapter called Lord of the Rings of Satan.
Yes, exactly. There is a chapter called Lord of the Rings in the book, and it's all about the moon of Saturn called Iapetus.
And we have the mysterious sound eye. Is sound-based technology a factor here?
Yes. Again, I go back to what I said in the first part. If you're going to destroy a planet, then the easiest way to do it would be to manipulate the fabric of space-time. In other words, you're going to create waves, longitudinal waves, in the fabric of space-time itself, and a longitudinal wave is an acoustic wave. It's a wave of compression and rarefaction. So, in other words, acoustics, if you extend the principle to encompass the idea of an area of rarefaction and compression in the fabric of space-time itself, you could describe that as an acoustic wave. So sound eyes, all of this stuff.
But let's pause. Let's pause here a little, because there's a couple of interesting indiciums, substantiations here. You have obviously you have the notion that sound is so essential to our existence that many, both Indian and also the biblical, and many, in the beginning was the word as like a creational word that God uses. There's an indication. You have also many people who think that the pyramids were somehow made by, or also that they were working through sound. That's always been...
Yes, that's quite correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then you have a very interesting discovery recently. I don't think it's Schock's discovery, but he's the one who made me aware of it, and that's that in Göbekli Tepe, they thought that two of those huge columns were very firmly grounded below, because it was all originally buried. But when they uncovered it, they noticed that it was so lightly attached that they were working like a tuning fork.
Yes.
So we see that the further back you go, the more the sound spectre of technology is a part of this.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You have to remember something. I pointed this out in Grid of the Gods. You have to remember that for the ancient cultures, the first physics unification, the first unification in physics was not magnetism and electricity. It was music. It was sound.
Right. Pythagoreans,
absolutely. And in fact, I happen to think, and I've kind of alluded to this in the various books, I happen to think the Pythagoreans knew all about our modern Western system of tempering the harmonic series. I think they knew all about it. They certainly discovered the problem. It's no secret, the Pythagorean comma. So they knew about the problem with the harmonic series, and I think they figured out that it only took a slight mathematical adjustment to be able to create an artificial harmonic series that unified the fundamental overtones. and basically allowed you to change keys in the middle of a piece. I think that was their big secret, as a matter of fact.
We wouldn't have music today if it wasn't for that.
We would not have our modern Western music at all if it weren't for that. If it weren't for that tuning, if it weren't for that slight mathematical adjustment. It's as, and I've said this over and over, it's as if nature presented us a puzzle to be solved. And, that was the first step in solving it. Physicists have been looking for trying to figure out how do we do that with the entire harmonic series, not just the auditory, but the electromagnetic.
Exactly, because this was a micro version of it. But it's the same principles if you zoom out.
It's the same principle.
Yeah.
And if you look now at these ancient structures, particularly the Great Pyramid, what you discover is that these structures are meant and designed to vibrate. The Great Pyramid in particular, because it sits on 4 sockets that are kind of like ball and socket joints in a skeleton, which allows that structure actually to move and vibrate with the earth. So it's vibrating constantly.
And of course we have Christopher Dunn, right, who was one of the first to come out with the fact that the pyramids, whatever else they are and have been used for, also there's a huge case there for them being machines.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And from there's a short step to your conclusion.
Well, if you look at the Grand Gallery, for example, in the Great Pyramid, if you look at it not with an Egyptologist's eye, but if you look at it from the standpoint of an engineer, it's one big, long, acoustical resonance chamber. It's almost like an organ pipe in some respects. So if you look at it from those points of view, yeah, this is an acoustic device of some sort. We don't know exactly what. But yeah.
You know what Carmen Bolter just said?
What's that?
She said that, those 2 huge cavities they recently discovered?
Yes.
She's convinced that because, it always entices the imagination and speculative mind. People think they find, I don't know, so, the mainstream notions, some dead king buried with all his treasures. No. I'm in line with her thinking that if at all they find something there, it has to be machinery.
Yeah.
Stuff that will confirm it as a machine. That's weird coming from her because she has a huge spiritual aspect to this. But there's not an either or here.
Right. Right. The texts do indicate that these weapons, whatever they were fundamentally acoustic in nature, and put quotation marks around acoustic because, again, we're talking about waves of compression and rarefaction in the fabric of space-time. We're talking about space warps, quite literally, in a certain sense, that have been weaponized. One
more substantiation. Michael Tellinger, he also points to sound as, I don't know what you make of his stuff, but at least he's on this track that these ancient South African ruins are sound-based structures too.
Yes, I think that's the case. In fact, I think a lot of those structures are acoustical resonating cavities. This is a principle you see in temples all the way up to Rome, to the Roman Empire. So I think there's, given the ancient obsession with the music of the spheres and viewing the cosmos as a harmony, quite literally.
Yeah, and did you know that in the Samothrakian mysteries, in order to be a master, you had to master it wasn't enough that you were like a spiritual person, you had to be able to master the resonance, you had to be able to vibrate the holy words.
Right.
Much like in India in mantras.
Right, exactly.
So that's a remnant of the importance of the sound aspect.
Right. I think so. Absolutely. I think so.
So we see then pyramids all over the earth, Joseph, and some are younger, of course, but especially those that are, with satellite technology, they found that there's so many buried pyramids still in Egypt.
Yes.
We have the notion of the Bosnian pyramid. We have the rumor of the Antarctica pyramid. We have the alleged submerged pyramids.
Yep.
And whatever we make of this, at least we know that the Great Pyramid is antediluvian, and so it's a very short step from that to thinking, okay, if they built one, they could have built many, and if they did, and if you have a pyramid on Mars, even Cydonia, then what are they for?
Exactly. Well, my thinking is that with the Great Pyramid, as you indicated, that you're dealing with an antediluvian structure. I'm foursquare in agreement with Alan Alford's basic hypothesis that you're dealing with three different periods of construction at Giza, with the Great Pyramid being the oldest. The other pyramids around the world, I do think, in some cases, exhibit machine-like properties, but I think you're dealing by those points, with possibly the exception of Teotihuacan in Mexico. I think you're dealing with a declined science where they begin to be used more in the way that conventional Egyptology understands them, as initiatory places, as parts of their religion, and so on. And again, I would make an exception there for Teotihuacan. So I think you're dealing with many of those things.
And a Bosnian, if the Bosnian is genuine, then that too has to be an exception.
That might be, and some of the under ocean pyramids might be. But clearly, I think...
And certainly the submerged one, because of the date.
Possibly.
If you take away the water, we were at the very age where they built these technologies, so they have to be.
Well, what I'm getting at here is I don't think you can extend the machine hypothesis to all pyramids.
Yeah. Okay.
And I certainly don't think you can extend the weapon hypothesis to all pyramids. There's a reason that I keep telling people that the weapon hypothesis I'm viewing solely as a property of the Great Pyramid, and possibly as a property of the design structure of Giza, but not necessarily of the other structures there.
Right.
So there is that bit of a distinction. But I'm certainly alive to the idea that at least some of these other pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan in Mexico, certainly exhibits a lot of machine-like properties. There's been mica that's been discovered there, mercury, things of just very strange stuff. The pyramid even at Pumupunku that they've discovered recently also looks to me to be very machine-like in nature.
So we have these weapons all around the globe, and possibly off-world too. So they could have a role then in this war, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think so. But again, I'm gonna caution people, as I put it in the Cosmic War. The Cosmic War hypothesis is not dependent on the hypothesis of the Great Pyramid being a weapon, or vice versa.
No.
But I regard them as two different hypotheses, but they certainly are corroborative of each other.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that you find them not only on planet Earth, but planet Mars, is suggestive. But I don't think in each and every case you're dealing with a weapon. I think the Great Pyramid here is unique because it has so many dimensional analogs of local celestial space that it appears to me to be a harmonic oscillator. It's designed with all of those things in it simply so that it can be a resonating machine with local celestial space. And you don't find that in many of the other pyramids around the world.
No, I have a stray thought I want you to chew on. Because I know that in your investigations you entertain the weapons that couldn't be destroyed as objects. But now we know that pyramids have been buried.
Right.
And we know that people have tried destroying the pyramids time immemorial, and they haven't managed. So I'm thinking, what if these are the weapons that can't be destroyed and was hidden?
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. What would happen, if let's look at it this way, if you're dealing with the Great Pyramid with a coupled harmonic oscillator to the structure of local celestial space, and I think clearly you are, What would happen if you destroy it? It might be catastrophic. Who knows? I don't know.
Right.
So yeah, you might be dealing with the pyramids themselves being these things.
And if Earth wasn't the main scene at the time, we have a pyramid on Earth. Let's bury that. So that would be. I mean, if the exploded planet was the main scene, God knows what pyramids would have been there. But you see what happened to the exploded planet, right?
Right.
And so I'm thinking that may be a good place to hide stuff, on Earth. If that wasn't the main scene, I mean.
Well,
that was like a peasant outpost.
Let's look at it differently. Let's go back to the Epic of Ninurta, and I talk about this in the Cosmic War in that particular category of things that could not be destroyed but that were hidden.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Chris Dunn's hypothesis about the Giza power plant, and on this respect, I think he did the most excellent service to alternative research and speculation, because he points out that in the Grand Gallery, there are the slots, those 27 slots that line each side of the Grand Gallery, and that it has an acoustical resonance chamber property. So he speculates that there are things missing inside the Great Pyramid that made it function as a machine. And one of the things that he speculates was that there were resonator banks, Helmholtz resonators, inside the Grand Gallery, whole banks of them. So in other words, he's literally thinking that this was a kind of musical machine, all right? Now, he did that entirely without any knowledge of what Zecharia Sitchin had said, based on his analysis of the Epic of Ninurta. Because in Sitchin's analysis, the Great Pyramid is the structure that they go into and pull stuff out of, so that structure quits functioning as this horrendous weapon. And in his analysis, the Grand Gallery was full of these tablets of destinies, all right? So let's stop and connect dots here. If the Epic of Ninurta is an inventory of stuff that used to be in the Great Pyramid, and I think, again, Sitchin's onto something, and I think, again, based on his engineering expertise, that Dunn is onto something. So you have an engineer looking at it and saying there's stuff missing, and you have a textual scholar looking at it and saying there's stuff missing.
Right.
So where did it go? Where did that stuff go? And my guess is if you're going to take the text seriously, then there's 3 possible places that you would want to hide stuff like that so that no one else would get it.
It's like the keys to the cars is hidden.
Yeah, it's like the keys to the car. Right, exactly. One place would be Mars. One place would be the moon.
Right.
And the third place would be somewhere in the Middle East.
Right.
And I've entertained this speculation publicly any number of times. I think that in addition to oil and all of the usual explanations for American and Russian and French and German involvement in that region, that the other secret agenda is they're trying to find this stuff. And to me, Al, the biggest example, the biggest clue here is the Baghdad Museum looting.
Right.
Because Saddam Hussein was digging up all of these places in Iraq. He had French and German archaeological teams in Iraq helping him dig these places up. And
so weird. He's not a cultural man at all, and he wanted to reinvent history, as all megalomaniacs. He's right. Like a god king. So what on earth did he? And tourism wasn't a big factor either.
Right.
So
exactly.
What would be his motivation for this?
I think he was looking for some of this stuff. He can read the Epic of Ninurta just like the rest of us can. So I think, yeah.
And many people don't know that he actually entertained notions similar to Sitchin and stuff.
Oh, yeah, he did. So I think, yeah, I think some of this Middle Eastern ruckus is that they're trying to find some of this stuff.
Because his regime wasn't a religious one, just for those who are not to know this.
No.
It was a materialistic one.
No.
Secular.
no, the Ba'athist regimes over there are wholly secular states. The Assad regime in Syria is a Ba'athist regime.
Mm.
To a certain extent, you could even look at Muammar Gaddafi as kind of an extension of that whole secularizing principle.
Yeah, but especially Iraq and Syria are relevant to the Sumerian
Well,
stuff.
even Libya, because again, you find the reference to some of this stuff being hidden in Monte Libico, in the mountains of Libya.
Oh, wow.
Ah, ah,
Okay.
ah. So, in other words, every place that is a trouble spot for Western policy is also a spot where you would find possibly some of this stuff.
Yeah, and of course Egypt itself. It goes without saying.
Of course, Egypt, absolutely, absolutely. So, I've always suspected, Al, that behind all of this stuff, there's a really deep hidden agenda that's going on with respect to the Middle East and all of the struggles there. They're looking for...
Yeah, but you know what? That goes to the notion that there's like a survival insight and rediscovery. And I don't think that's the place we should go today, because that's reserved for future talks, because it's so relevant.
Right.
But it does, just so people know, yes, that grants kind of a contemporary knowledge. Someone is in the know of something. So yeah, I agree. But let's go back to the ancients. So they had this war then, and one planet blew up. By the way, what about the top capstone? Many people are speculating that's the key,
Well, I think...
Do you have any...
I happen to think that the capstone was one of these objects that was either hidden or destroyed. Because the interesting thing here is that Herodotus records the capstone still being on the pyramid.
That recently? Wow.
Yeah, when he saw it. And he also describes the Great Pyramid as having been covered, obviously, with limestone that was so bright during the daytime that you could see it from several miles away. And that when you got up close, it was not only covered with hieroglyphics, but also that there was a water line about halfway up. Now, take that for whatever it's worth. Herodotus is Herodotus after all.
No. But that's substantiated by Schwaller de Lubitsch, Robert Schoch, Anthony West. We know this now.
Right.
Due to the Sphinx.
Right.
So that's not weird at all.
No, it isn't. But what that does mean is that the pyramid is older than the flood, which, if you're a flood person in the alternative community, they usually date it between 10 to 12,000 years BC. So in other words, it's a very old structure. Yeah,
but unlike the Sphinx, the evidence is removed. The outer layer of the pyramids is
right.
We destroyed it. So that's why they can't, and we can't date stone anyway. So it's up for, it's in a mainstream perspective, the pyramid is still up for antediluvian possibility.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So could that be the weapon that blew up the origin to Ceres?
I think it's entirely possible, but I also think it's entirely possible that it may be itself a structure that was built over a spot where the original pyramidal weapon may have been. It's one or the other. But I do think, given all the strange properties of pyramids that scientists have been tinkering and toying with, the Soviets especially, most people don't realize this, given all their strange properties, it's entirely possible that there were physics principles unknown to us that may have made at least some of these things horrifically powerful weapons. Because again, you're really literally dealing with something that manipulates the fabric of space-time. Once you've admitted that, then weaponizing it, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, but there's another perspective here too, based on what you've been saying, and that is that if they needed a place to live, and the Earth wasn't an optimal scenario, enter the moon, enter the pyramid as a harmonicizer. Now, could the planet have been exploded from removing such a harmonic effect? Sure. Instead of being, instead of a ray pointed to it, and like Star Wars.
Well, again, it's not you're thinking in the wrong way about the pyramid being a weapon. It's not a point and aim weapon. It's a resonance weapon.
Right.
So in other words, think of it like the open string on an acoustic piano, and you hit that same note an octave lower or higher. It's a resonance.
Right. Yeah, but it's a Death Star wording that puts me off track here, you know.
Yeah, it does many people, but it's not a point and aim weapon. It's a resonance weapon.
Right.
So you don't actually have to aim it. But yeah, it could be that these things are somehow playing with a planet's gravitational field, holding it together, and so on and so forth. It is interesting to me that many of these pyramidal structures on Earth appear to be built over nodal points in the so-called world grid. And
grid of the gods.
Again, we have to understand what I think is behind the world grid, and most people don't get this. But if you're dealing with standing waves in the planet itself that are moving over the surface of the planet, and you're creating several different waves, you're thumping the planet at different points on the planetary surface, it's going to create interference patterns at certain points on the surface. And at those points, please hear me now, because this is hugely important for what I'm talking about in terms of resonance. At those points, all the vectors of those waves will zero sum. So in other words, it will not appear that there's a great deal of force there, but there is. It's a pure magnitude of force. It's not traveling in any particular direction. It's just there as the result of all those vectors zero summing. So once you've admitted that, then if you locate something at those points that taps into that energy, you can create resonance effects presumably anywhere on the planet. Spooky action at a distance is what Einstein called it. And if you extend that principle to interfering longitudinal waves in the fabric of space-time, then you can create resonance effects off planet. So I think in other words, what I'm suggesting here is you're dealing with an extremely sophisticated and very advanced physics with some of these things. And again, you read some of the ancient texts from that point of view, and it's very clear that they're trying to describe something very sophisticated in the best language that they had.
Just to go completely overboard with speculation, if there was a similar structure on, let's just call it Ceres, so we don't have to say the exploded planet all the time. Okay. Let's say Ceres, the original Ceres. Let's say they had a similar constructions that were keeping their planet in check for being good place for life. Right. And you use a Cydonia or a Giza against their stabilizer. Right. Then you have a both. It's not an either or. You have both.
Right, exactly.
An external cause and an internal kaput, short circuit.
It stands to reason that if you are going to have a society, an interplanetary society, you're going to have communication mechanism, and longitudinal waves would be perfect for it because you're literally not subject to the constraints of the speed of light.
Right.
So these things would be mechanisms for kind of holding the whole thing together. And therefore, yes, you could use them to tap into other resonators of similar nature on other planets and load energy into them and blow them up. So yeah, this is an extraordinarily speculative, sophisticated type of thinking I'm advocating here. But I happen to think it is the case just based on what the texts themselves are relating. And again, it's a way of looking at those texts. It could be that the academics are entirely right. I happen not to think so, but you have to...
No. That we know they're not. That's what gives us license to speculate here. We don't have to be right, but even if we're wrong here, that doesn't make them right.
Well, that's true.
We're not in that dichotomy dimension. So
that's true.
But... you know what? It's a very depressing thought on a theological, philosophical basis, because that means that that's so sophisticated. I mean, we deify these entities, these people. And even back then, they were so human in a bad way that, errata est humana or something, that they, so much hate, so much destruction, despite their level of, that doesn't bode well for us today. And we're in a transition phase now where we are getting onto this level, and we haven't solved the human problem. That's the entire problem, right? We are full of bad, we are children with matches, basically, and they were.
What I think is interesting, it's what I think is very, very interesting. It is profoundly disturbing, but what is very interesting is when you read those ancient texts, particularly where humanity is mentioned, what you see is basically a very corrupt, power-mad oligarchy, a political class,
right,
that has nothing but contempt for the vast lot of humanity,
right,
to the extent that they're willing to destroy it with floods or what have you. And it's that class that exhibits, the gods that are exhibiting this extremely psychopathic, narcissistic behavior. It's not humanity.
No. As in Earth people, yeah.
Right, exactly. It's a parallel to what we see now. You have a corrupt oligarchy that is so totally out of touch with the people that they're obviously contemplating massive amounts of destruction and trying to do destructive things,
and have done many destructive things.
And have done many destructive things.
We call it history. But
call it history.
The lesson to take from this, then, there's actually a political lesson here, and that is that if we're going to survive as a species, we have to restructure our structure. We cannot let these alienated oligarchs go on.
Right.
0.1% now. They used to be 1%, now they're 0%. It will end up with a handful of mad people with total power.
Well, again,
and history will repeat itself.
Those texts are very interesting because as a result of this cosmic war, if you're blowing up planets, it's going to affect everybody in the solar system at some point. And as a result of it, I've always maintained that whatever civilization was here utterly collapsed. The mad oligarchs were banking that they could pull it off and wouldn't be caught in the fallout, so to speak. And, surprise, surprise, they were. And they literally had to jumpstart humanity on the road back up to that level. But they had blown their entire infrastructure apart, depopulated everything. That's the problem. You play the war dice and things get out of control. And, it's like Operation Barbarossa. Everything's going smoothly until the nutcase decides that he's going to change up the whole plan midway through it. And, this is what you see in these texts. So, we have
nothing is new under the sun.
Nothing is new under the sun. Ecclesiastes, absolutely. And it's frightening in a way, but at the same time, I kind of have to laugh at it in a certain sense, because here we are again. We've got our weapons of mass destruction, and we haven't learned anything.
Exactly.
At some point you have to think, well, maybe we'll get it sooner or later, but it's not going to happen as long as we keep listening to these oligarchs and giving them the serious attention that they think they deserve.
No, but this is yet another of many, many, many reasons they would want to cover up the truth about our distant past, because many people can't understand, why can't they just come clean about how old we are, blah, blah, blah. The people who they can't connect the dots. They don't see how obvious it is that you have to cover this up. But here's another reason, because if the elites are causing havoc all through history, you better be the one who writes history, because you don't want people to wake up to that fact.
Well, the problem is, if the elites are writing history and they've been this destructive all along, then that gives them a certain spiritual heritage to certain nefarious individuals that we might as well mention who they are. You've got the Satan tradition in the biblical literature, even in Islam. You've got the bad guys in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
And you do have it here too in the Sumerian,
sure.
and I want to get to that.
Absolutely.
But finally, before we take the break, Joseph, we can't avoid the obvious question then is ancient breakaways. Did anyone survive?
I've always had the model in my head, Al, that yes, there were survivors of this war because, number one, the texts indicate this.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're taking inventories, you've got survivors. But I've also had as my model the World War I analogy. In other words, World War I was basically a stalemate. You had the Entente powers laying siege to Central Europe for 4 years, and basically they get nowhere, and everybody just decides we've had enough, we're quitting. This is the way it looks to me in these ancient texts. You have a tremendously destructive war, blows apart the infrastructure, blows apart the economy, and people survive on both sides.
Yeah, but I mean, did anyone survive with the toys intact? Obviously, we're here, so there are survivors, but did anyone, because if one planet exploded, another one, Mars got desolated, Earth, obviously life went on, but they would have to have outposts, bases here and there.
Sure.
Right?
I think it's entirely possible, although I don't discuss this in any of my books, but I do think it's entirely possible.
It's Hoagland area, but yeah.
Yeah, that you have survivors somewhere else other than on this planet. Again, that the text would seem to indicate that.
That puts a spin on the ancient aliens theories,
Yeah. I've said it many times. I think we've got cousins out there. In other words, I think the genus Homo is bigger than this planet. Homo sapiens sapiens is one species within that big genus. And there's every indication, both from ufological studies and
even on Earth. Neanderthals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
just as intelligent.
Yeah, Neanderthals and so on. So yeah, I think there's every possibility that you might have some of our cousins out there that may have survived with some of this technology.
Could they have put a cap on Earth, keep people here?
I was just getting to Let's take our break and come back and tackle that one.
Okay, that sounds great.
That's an excellent topic.
And also, we promised people to go a little into the culprits who was behind. So I want you also in the last part to account a little for the personalities involved here, okay?
Sure.
Especially Kian and Lil, because that's a very interesting mystery right there, right?
Oh, yes.
A conflict of interest or whatever you want to call it. So good guys, bad guys. But that's a teaser then, people.
All right.
Don't go anywhere. We'll soon be back in part 3.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.